Welcome crossbow enthusiasts and YouTube viewers to this detailed design review of the Wicked Ridge RDX 400 from 10Point. In this review I'm going to be covering the competitors, the process by which I chose this particular model. So I'll go through my short list and then tell you about my buying decision, what I saw as the main benefits of this model. Then, since one of the major attractions of the RDX 400 is that 400 in the title, the power and the speed of this. There's a lot on YouTube about this issue, so I shall quickly sum that up and also give you my thoughts on it, which I can't see discussed anywhere else, so that may or may not be of any relevance or interest. And then finally, the major part of the review will be some close-up video and observations of the details of the design of this model and issues that I see with it, along with a balanced conclusion of what I love about it and a potential show-stopping issue that makes me wonder if it's actually a safe piece of equipment from a design point of view. Just a quick point for those of you who are familiar with this model. The scope that's on there is not the original. It's a Hawk Vantage. Let's see if I can bring that into. So that's the model. The main disadvantage, of course, is that it doesn't have the reticule showing the drop at different yardages. But the key thing for me is that it has an adjustable objective. So the mounted scope is not the one that comes with it. That's the one I've shown down on the bottom left. So the first model that I got interested in with crossbows was the Mission Sub 1, and what attracted me about that particular model was the performance at distance and the quality engineering, and from the YouTube videos just the lack of recoil and the smoothness of the shooting experience. But it's quite a bit more expensive than the RDX 400. The next model that attracted me was Scorpid. When I did my research, I discovered that Scorpid were the originators of the reverse draw design, and I'll be saying more about that in a minute. What I loved about Scorpid was, again, their engineering approach and the sheer quality of their product. What dissuaded me was the sheer size of the models, and I presumed, and this is me doing my kind of management consulting view, is that I just saw them as a lower volume producer compared to 10Point, and therefore, logically, the prices are going to be higher for the same amount of product. The next model that attracted my interest was Raven, and I like their technology. Like 10Point, they seem to be technology focused, and they've been doing a lot of innovating, and the frictionless system I found very attractive from a design point of view. However, more research on YouTube suggested that there were some quality issues, some not that it's so much the design, but the production seemed to be suffering, and in particular string life, which was supposed to be, from a design point of view, a benefit of the frictionless system. In practice, the strings seem to be wearing out abnormally quickly. That may have been resolved by now, but again, the Ravens are a lot more expensive than this particular Wicked Ridge RDX 400. So that then brings me on to 10 point, and again, from a company point of view, I saw them as a company with a larger budget, larger volumes, larger budgets, and therefore, as well as being very technology focused. And I found that very attractive. And then when I found the RDX 400 at this price point, and I was very attracted by that model. I should say that within the 10-point range there was also the Horton reverse draw, but that is a more expensive model. It's also older, so I presume the trigger is not as good as on the more recent model, and the camouflage was not as extensive as on the Wicked Ridge RDX 400. On the subject of camouflage, you'll notice that even with the Wicked Ridge, it is limited. So the handhold underneath is a solid piece of black plastic material. That part is, unlike the more expensive 10-point models, is not camouflaged. So the standard benefits of the reverse draw design that gets discussed in the trade show YouTube videos that I've seen is first of all that the weight is balanced in the middle. So there the riser is, so the big chunk of metal is in the middle instead of the front of the bow, which means it's with stand-free shooting, freestanding shooting, is a much more viable proposition with the weight balanced in the middle, and also the power stroke. So from up at the front, it can be pulled further through. If you look at the figures, then a normal power stroke is about 12 inches, and with a reverse draw it goes 15 inches and above, depending on the model. So the first of my engineering points is that another benefit of reverse draw that isn't talked about is the way the stress is contained within the system. So with the standard bow, with the limbs at the front, all the tension when the bow is cocked is transmitted from the trigger box at the back of the bow towards the stock, all the way to the front, and is held all the way through the material of the barrel, whatever the technical term is. And I've seen a video of a Barnett model that had problems where the flight rail was bending because it wasn't strong enough to take the strength of the limbs when drawn. With the reverse draw design, when the bow is cocked, so the string is held here, then there's some of the tension is transmitted through the barrel through this short distance here, and then after that everything is contained from within the riser through the limbs, which means that the barrel can be made of a lighter, cheaper material. So that's my engineering belief in a third major benefit of almost zero barrel stress with the reverse draw design. My reasons for choosing the Wicked Ridge RDX 400 over the other reverse draw designs, particularly from Scorpid, are that it's much more compact than Scorpid models. I find the camo is very attractive, and it's not a paid for extra, it's part of the standard package, and of course that price point is just unbeatable. As you saw earlier on, I've got the model with the AccuDraw. That's because I believe from an engineering point of view, to gently and slowly crank back the string and slowly load up the limbs, I just believe is going to result in less wear and tear on a system. It just seems to me like a good engineering principles, as well as achieving a consistent draw on the string. There's no possibility of things pulling back slightly unevenly. So next subject, the pros and cons of having more powerful crossbows. There are a number of YouTube videos out there that saying that the extra speed is completely pointless, and quite emotionally so. I think the argument on the Scorpid website is they provide a balanced, unemotional argument against higher speeds. So rather than repeating the points, I'd recommend you go and read that. My thoughts are the extra power giving you a flatter trajectory, which means less drop, which people talk about. There's also so having the reticule with the drop points for the further yardage. If you've got a flatter trajectory, then the need for that is going to be less. Hence my Hawk that doesn't have that has an adjustable objective on the scope, but doesn't have the drop points for the further out shots. And finally, wind resistance. If you're going faster, then I'm assuming you're going to be able to cut through a side wind better than if you're going more slowly. Now the cons are basically cost, as I see it. Any kind of target practice, you can need a much higher speed, higher spec speed target. And even with those targets, if you're sighted in and get anywhere near an existing hole, then your arrows are going to penetrate deeper, and eventually some of those fletchings are going to come off, and it's going to cost more in repair or replaced arrows. My final thought on speed is what I call the elephant in the room, which is from the hunting perspective. So certainly for a perfectly placed shot, there's no benefit in having additional speed, since you're always going to get a pass through. But what if you're slightly off? So if you hit any kind of bone, be it a rib or a shoulder joint, or even further around part of the breastbone, with these higher pad models, you stand a chance of actually punching through. But nobody talks about this. And I presume they don't talk about it because they don't want to encourage hunters to take risky shots. But in the hands of an ethical hunter, these higher powered crossbows could reduce animal suffering by basically reducing risk, assuming that they ethically are shooting under 50 yards, so that there's less chance of the animal jumping and moving away from where you've aimed. So now for the final and main part of this review, my observations and potential issues. So first of all, this is a beautifully built piece of equipment. I absolutely love it. When I unboxed it, I was thrilled to bits. I noticed that when so the next observation is that when I drew the bow, cranked it, I noticed that the resistance changes as I went through the draw process, or should I say cranking process. So at the beginning of the cranking, so from the beginning to about here, the resistance feels pretty low, and then from then on it gets progressively tougher. So when I'm cranking the AccuDraw, I can feel how much resistance there is, and so at the beginning there's almost no resistance, and then it gradually increases. Now this to me is the opposite of what the Mission Sub 1 were talking about with their 80% let off, where for them at the end of the draw, closest to the trigger box, there's an 80% let off. So when the arrow is shot at the beginning of the travel, it's accelerating slowly, and then the power ramps up, which increases the acceleration and resulting in a smoother release of the arrow, accelerating it on its way, and presumably resulting in that almost zero recoil, low vibration excellence that is the hallmark of the Mission Sub 1, and indeed the Scorpid models. So just to say that my experience of this model, and there may be some other technical reason why I'm experiencing that change in resistance from low at the beginning to high at the end, means that you get the opposite. It's an opposite physics result, and the bow does have quite a lot of recoil and vibration. That said, it is a real tack driver. It knocks them in the same hole again and then again and again from certainly at 20 yards. in the hands of me, an rank amateur. First time I've had a crossbow. My next observation is that the AccuDraw unit is actually mounted quite low down on the stock, which means that the angle of the cord which comes out of here is quite sharp. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's the kind of angle, and as a result the riser has to have this dip in it, because the AccuDraw cord has to, when at the beginning of the cranking process, only just clears the bottom of the riser there. And I'm wondering, you know, why is that? Is it all I could come up with? Maybe it's a safety reason that they want the unit that actually clips on to the string to hang on tightly. But presumably, and so with the sharp angle, that's pulling the this unit that's holding the string. It's holding it down on the rail, which is ensuring a good grip to the string. But presumably you could achieve the same thing just by having, you know, deeper teeth and make them out of metal instead of plastic. Presumably that would result in just as good safety without the need to have this strange angle. And strange angles is really the theme of most of the rest of my observations. So the big problem for me is to do with strings and cable angles. So as you can see there, the string is horizontal, but the cables underneath it have quite a sharp angle, and there's a reason for that. It comes out of the way it's designed. So the angle is created by the distance, the height difference between the string, which is there, and the winding groove on the cam, which is there. That's really difficult to show. Hopefully that might come out. But there's I'll do close-ups of this in a minute. There's a winding groove on the cam underneath. But the winding groove is only about 1/4 of an inch below the top part of the cam, where the string winds around. But when it gets down to the barrel, the depth that the tensioning cables that balance the tension on the cam above and below the spindle has to be the depth of the height of a fletching, which, as you can see, is quite a bit more than the 1/4 of an inch. So here's a close-up of the cam. So at the top of the cam, the string winds around, and underneath you can see the balancing cable wraps around a second groove, which is there. You just see the groove there. Autofocus is playing up. So why does this matter? Well, look at the angle of the cable at the back here. Can you see, as I move up and down, it's not properly aligned with the groove. So the main string at the front is properly aligned with the groove in the cam. It passes exactly horizontally through the groove, but underneath this cam winding here, as you can see, look at the angle of that string, the cable, sorry. It's actually fouling the bottom edge of the cam groove, and that edge is I mean, it's not knife sharp, but it is sharp. and I'm going to draw it next and show you what happens with that cable fouling on the bottom edge of that groove. So here it is with a white background. So you can really see how sharp that string angle is and how it is not lining up. This is the below the spindle where the cable wraps around the lower cam groove. It just does not line up at all, and it can't, because of the height difference between the fletching on the right hand side, the height of the barrel, versus the less than a quarter, maybe 1/8 of an inch difference between the height of those two grooves, the string groove and the lower groove for the balancing tensioning cable. So there's a straight down angle between the limbs, and you can see how acute that angle is with the tensioning cable. And as I move it from side to side, you may just be able to see how it fouls the bottom edge of the cam groove. There's a close-up of the underside of the cam. As you can see, it's heavily asymmetric, and so the angle gets sharper the closer to the edge of the draw that it gets, and I'll try and show that in a moment. So the problem with these angles is string damage, or cable damage to be more precise. I've fired 35 arrows, I've been counting, and that is the damage that has occurred already after just 35 arrows, and that damage there is at the end of the draw as it gets cut by the bottom edge of the cam groove, which I'm going to show next. So I'm now going to crank it using the AccuDraw, and at the beginning I feel no resistance at all. Now I'm beginning to feel a bit of resistance that far through the draw cranking process. Now it's getting stiffer. And we can see the string, the damaged part of the string is now advanced to there. I should have said damaged part of the cable. So now the damaged cable is underneath that cam. It's about 2 inches away from the cam at this point, and we are most of the way through the cranking process. So there you can clearly see the damage to the cable as it approaches the end of the cranking process. So I'll just continue with the cranking operation, I should say. And that's it. So the trigger is moved, and the dry fire inhibitor has, the safety rather, has moved to the safe position. The white mark there. So that's just how compact the bow gets when it's fully cocked, and it's wonderful. I love it. However, so now with it fully cocked, the angle is at its most extreme, and what you're seeing there with that middle orange cable is it's way below the bottom edge of the groove of the cam that it's supposed to be winding around. That's how acute the angle is. So that's a close-up of where the damage is happening. So here's the close-up of where the damage is happening. See how that cable is bending around the bottom edge of the cam groove and is fouling on it. So here you can see just how extreme the angles are on that cable from the string that's firing the arrows on the left, and the tensioning cable is at that extreme angle down at the bottom, and that's cutting into a horizontal cam groove, and that top edge you can see just at the top between the V of the riser, just in there, that's where it's fouling the edge and the cable damage is occurring. And there's the close-up. Look at that angle. So what's the alternative? Well, that's where the problem starts. You've got the height of the fletching there going through to where the two grooves for the top is a string and the bottom is the cable are virtually next to each other, and that creates the angle which is causing the fouling of the cable cutting at the bottom edge of the winding cam. Bearing in mind that bottom cam groove is asymmetric. Well, as you can see there, if they simply positioned the winding groove further down the central spindle, then that cable could be, the bottom tensioning cable could be horizontal. I mean, the limbs would be further apart, but the bow would still be just as compact. You know, axle to axle wouldn't change. The limbs would just be further apart. So I don't understand why they don't reposition that lower winding groove on the central spindle for the cam. Anyway, those are my thoughts. So one other issue, of course, is I've got, as you can see, is cam lean. That's one side. And the other side is not quite so bad, but still there's definitely a few millimeters of cam lean. And how does that happen? The cables, it's flat, uncocked, it's completely flat. So, although my unit obviously looks as though there's a problem with it, and it's interesting, how does that cam lean occur? Because uncocked, the cams are completely flat. I won't bother with that, just take my word for it, they are flat, but when cocked, as you saw, there's a different amount of cam lean on the right cam is the worst, the left still has a few millimeters. And how does that occur? It can't be the cable tension, because the cams are flat, uncocked. So it must be what a difference between the draw weight of the upper and lower limbs. I'm not sure. A lot of questions in this review. Bearing in mind, so a bit about myself, I'm a first-time crossbow owner. As you can tell from my accent, I'm English. I'm not American, and therefore my preferences, my needs are different. I need to shoot closer up because of restrictions in the UK, no hunting, and so on. Private land use only. So I'm not able to go into a shop and look at different crossbows and see the different designs and discuss them and see them being cocked and fired. This is my first ever experience, so some of the issues I've raised might be completely naive. Please do uh, leave your thoughts and wisdom in the comments. I'd really appreciate any feedback on the points I've raised in this design review. To sum up, I absolutely love this piece of equipment. I love the RDX 400 from Wicked Ridge from 10 Point. But it certainly looks as though my unit is faulty. I'm trying to get that sorted out with my UK supplier at the moment. That's proving to be immensely hard work, which is a shame. See how that goes. But at the end of it, there seems to be this design issue, and I don't understand why the limbs aren't further apart with more spacing between the winding groove on the cam and the string part of the cam, so they could get that lower tensioning cable horizontal, because at the moment it seems like the design means that those lower tensioning cables are going to get damaged. Now, it's not wear and tear, they're actually going to be physically damaged by the design flaw. Now, if a firearm was sold with that kind of design flaw, I know that would be, I'm sure, would be deemed unsafe for use, unfit for use, since it could go off. Well, these crossbows at 400-pound draw weight, if that lower cable snaps when I'm in the process of drawing it, that could cause a lot of injury. And so, I've only fired 35, it'll be 36 now, arrows from this unit, and already that lower tensioning cable is being damaged by the at full draw, where it cuts across the lower edge of the cam groove. So I love it, but it seems fundamentally unfit for use, unsafe for use as it's currently designed. And I'd love to be wrong, so please do leave your wisdom in the comments below. I'd be much appreciative. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye from England.